Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to be talking about what do you do right before paint to make sure your finish is exactly where you want it to be. Now obviously if you started blocking this thing with a lot of soft blocks, this video is really going to be irrelevant. We have everything on this fender for this 55 Chevy wet sanded in 600 grit wet sandpaper. You guys could use whatever grit you want, but the whole idea here is that you have a reflection from just the primer to be able to check things. We're going to be using Like 90's panel check for actually checking the reflection. And what Like 90 is it is a aerosol spray that you can get an idea if you were to put clear coat over that primer gray fender. And it's the best representation I could say that I think that you're going to get versus a clear coat before you actually spend the money on using all of your paint. So if you use wax and grease remover, there's going to be a lot of guys that will say that's just fine, and that is fine, that can be used. But what you need to know is that there is a difference in the finish. There's a lot of things that go into making sure that finish is where you need it to be, and to me, Like 90 panel check is a great way to have insurance, so that way you have spent the time and knowing that you're going to get the finish that you desire. The other thing is we have found an area when spraying it. We used wax and grease remover, we used Like 90, and we used waterborne cleaner just to give you guys a different visual of what you would see. So with this one we sprayed Like 90, and you can see that the finish looks very smooth across the entire panel. And we don't have any dry areas, we don't have any areas that looks hazy. And then when you see it with the comparable wax and grease remover, you're going to see how it looks a little bit more textury. Yes, it's doable, and yes, you can wipe the panel down, but it just doesn't give you the same length of time to be able to check your work. And then you start seeing areas dry, and you're going to fight that back and forth. And then when we use waterborne cleaner, you can see that that just looks like a sudsy mess. And the only way you're going to see it actually look smooth is if you wipe it, and again, it's the same scenario. The biggest benefit is that Like 90 at least stays wet long enough that you can check your panel thoroughly. Now that we have found a very slight ripple, and I hope this shows up in the camera, but right here we have pencil marked our ripple. And I mean, we're talking about a ripple that's about the thickness of a sheet of paper. How do you eliminate those areas that are gonna fight you on making that mirror finish? Well, the number one, if you're trying to do that with a DuraBlock or something that's not an acrylic block, it's already out the window. What we're gonna be using today is Mirka's dry guide coat. If I know in the reflection, I just circled it with a pencil while it was still wet. And then we use the Mirka to come in over the 600 grit scratch with it dry. We're going to go just beyond the area that we know there's a potential ripple or problem. And then what we're going to do is we have 220 grit on the block. If you use something that's more aggressive, it's not going to show you as much detail. So think of it like viewing this from 1,000 feet. How detailed are you going to see those imperfections in your panel? Obviously, the higher grit that you use, the better that it will work. But what you have to also know is that if you're too aggressive, those fingers, those scratches, are going so deep you're not going to see those imperfections. But if you go too high, say you use 400 grit, it's not going to be enough to work out the ripple. We don't know if we have the ability to work out this ripple yet, but I want to show you guys how you find it. Light pressure with your fingertips and just grazing over the panel. If you start pushing with your hands, you're already out the window. If you know there's a ripple area that's an issue in the reflection while you're checking it, you just want to focus on bridging. If it's here, our hands need to be out here so that way we can see the representation. And you almost want to file it just ever so slightly. You can see it only takes a couple swipes. If you come in here, you can see that this is hitting heavily and you have one spot, but right there, and a little bit right here, there's like a high and a very minute low. You can see that this is so minute, if a 220 grit is scratching through it, but barely, we will probably be able to chase this out. If it was drastically different and it was a darker spot, we could then block this out, and if we get a couple areas that burn through to filler, we already know we're going to be using filler to fill a bigger area. So at that point you're going to reprime anyway. So at least here we can see such a very minute thing that we can take the block, and as long as we make sure we don't put our hand in that area, stay on either end of that low, and just lightly, your fingers are pretty much only guiding the block. And I can even tip the block up a little bit to get up into this radius here so I can see what we got. But if you guys look, now that I have this all cleaned up out here, you can see exactly where that very, very minute ripple is. And then if you have enough primer on your panel, you just slowly chase it out. Keeping your hands out of that area. As soon as it disappears, you're bringing everything that was level down to that area that was low. And now you have your mirror finish. At that point, all you have to do is guide coat the area that you just scratched with 220 grit and re-wet sand it with 600. If there's no filler showing, you're moving right into sealer and base. If you're wondering, how do I know whether I can take care of it with primer or with filler? We like to make sure our bodywork is good enough to the point where we know when we prime that it's going to be good. So what I would say is carefully block this area, and if you have it go away completely, then you can carry on with your wet sanding. But at any point, if you break through that primer to any kind of filler or metal, you're gonna have to reprime that area anyway to seal those moisture areas that's going to soak up that primer and give you a different finish that you would want. So if you're trying to compare, you should know that if you have enough primer and it's not broken through, you can carry on this process. Just know that if you break through any area, at that point you might as well take some glaze putty and just skim over it ever so slightly to make that perfect. When I'm blocking my glazing putty, if there was a problem that wouldn't leave, then I would go back to like 150 grit, and I would make sure that my spreads are very, very smooth and precise on where I need it. I would pencil the outer perimeter area, scuff in the middle so you have adhesion and there's no guide coat down in there, and then put a very smooth skim. The 150 is going to cut it out just enough, but you're going to focus your pressure only on the filler area, not outside, because we don't want to work that finish down. There is a term, over sanding, and when people start using all these other grits, like for example, you go from 150, 220, 320, 400, and then 600, in my opinion, and this is purely my opinion, you guys can do what you want, I think it's over sanding. You start giving yourself the ability to, hand placement is everything. If you're looking for a specific finish, you can work something to a point of, you just start causing ripples. 220 is, to me, the best way to iron out a ripple. From 220, as long as you're guide coating and you're using 600 at a, in my opinion, a minimum, 600 wet sand, make sure there is no guide coat left behind. You just saved yourself time, money, and material by just going directly from 220 to a 600. You just have to be a little bit more thorough. So let's see if we can chase this one out. Almost. Biggest thing here, you don't see my hands going in there. So at that point, we don't have any black showing, any area where there's a ripple or a low. You have ironed that out. But what I would recommend is, we just did a whole bunch of sanding with 220 grit. So guide coat an area a little bit bigger than what you have, double check your work. Go back through it, and go back through it uniformly to make sure you didn't cause a ripple here now or on either end of your area that you had a ripple. But at least at this point, you have a security point where as long as you don't have a burn through, you can just wet sand these scratches out that were 220 and carry on with getting the mirror finish. We've showed you guys what it looks like to spray like 90 panel check over the panel and show you where an imperfection lies. We showed you guys how to pinpoint exactly where your affected area is and how to massage it out. We have other videos showing that if it did need filler, how to go about that and what steps it takes to fix it. However, if you have enough primer on the vehicle, like we did, thankfully, we did not have to take another day or two and reprime that area to fix this blemish. There was enough of the VP 2050 primer on the panel to be able to massage it out with that 220 grit and then come back through, wet sand it, and final check with our panel check. If you guys want to know any more about how to get this finish, go to sylvesterscustoms.com, where we actually teach hands-on with people on dialing in bodywork, metalwork, fabrication, metal finishing. All of the things to get to this point matter. Every detail matters in what you do. And we hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we'll see you on the next one.